Once a year, Apple holds a developer conference in California that shows off the latest and greatest from the company. I'm Julian Chikatu, mobile editor at Digital Trends with our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Kaplan, and here's what to expect from WWDC 2019. So I'll be on the show floor on June 3rd when the show kicks off. I've never been there. This is my first WWDC, but you have been there before. What's it like?
You're in for a great time. Well, I don't know, maybe. This is a very interesting show. So each of the major technology companies holds these big developer conferences, and they're all a little bit different. The big Microsoft event is 100% a developer show, right? They have people on stage coding. If you're watching as a consumer, you're going, this is a little bit boring. Nevertheless, they unveil a lot of stuff, and it's kind of cool to watch. Google, on the other hand, makes a big consumer spectacle out of their shows. You've been to a bunch of those, right? There's days and days of just consumer-focused stuff. And behind the scenes, well, there's also a developer conference going on with a lot of really neat stuff there too. Apple kind of bridges the gap. They have a keynote that's very much consumer focused. Here's the latest from the iPhone. Here's the latest about our Apple TV products, etc. And then after that, the doors get closed. It's all developer stuff. And you're sitting there going, why am I here? What else is going on?
Well, hopefully I'll be able to get in on the action behind the scenes and get a lot of other coverage as well, exactly. Aside from what we see at the keynote. Speaking of the keynote, I think the biggest announcement is going to be iOS 13. It's always the star of the show. They spend the most amount of time on it. So the first major thing that we can expect from iOS 13 is dark mode. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but to a lot of people, it is a big deal. Apple released a dark mode for macOS last year, and that was sort of, positively received. Basically, you're getting a darker skin or darker theme for several of Apple's apps, and then developers can add support for it OS-wide. So basically, you'll just have a nicer time reading on your phone in bed, so that you're not having like a giant white bright light burning your eyes out.
And we've seen this as a trend across smaller apps, so it's nice to have it baked into the operating system as a whole.
Right, and good to know is that Android also just announced a dark theme for Android Q, which is coming out in August. So it's nice to see overall the industry adopting a darker theme. And then next up is the merging of the Find My Friends and the Find My iPhone app. So basically they're just gonna merge those two apps together, so you're getting a cleaner interface, just like a one-stop shop to find your friends and find your iPhone, which is kind of weird to lump that into the same category.
They'll make it a little simpler.
Yeah, so a couple of other apps that are going to get the updates is the Home apps reportedly is going to have better support for security cameras. The Books app is going to have a progress tracker as well as a potential reward system for when you complete more books, which is kind of a nice. Safari is finally going to get a download manager, which sounds like something that should have happened like 10 years ago.
What year is this?
Yeah, and the Files app is going to have better integration with third-party software. The Mail app is going to have better organization and better categorization as well as iMessage is going to have something interesting. It's going to become more like WhatsApp in the sense that you're going to be able to set up a profile picture, you're going to be able to set up like a display name, so it's going to become more of like a messaging system like WhatsApp where you find people like that, so that's kind of interesting.
What's missing here is the big buzzword that we've been talking about all year, which is 5G. It seems to me, and now I know you just came from Chicago, from Dallas. You were in Chicago earlier. We've been testing 5G across the country, and maybe it's a little early days for 5G implementations. Maybe you as a consumer aren't quite ready to go out and spend your money. Probably can't even get 5G where you are. But if you're a developer behind the scenes building an app that relies on data, this would be a good time to be testing that out. I would think we should be hearing from Apple at WWDC about 5G. So it'll be interesting to see if that pops out or if they say we're holding that off for a later version.
Yeah, I mean, if they mention 5G, that'd be great, but also we do think, according to rumors, that we're gonna see a 5G iPhone in 2020, not 2019. So it does make sense that 5G is more of a talking point for iOS 14 next year. But again, giving the developers a head start would always be a good thing, so that would be nice.
If Apple waits until next June to start giving developers a chance to start programming for an iPhone, which comes out in September, that's a long way to wait, whereas we've been talking 5G all year, and we're going to continue talking 5G for the rest of this year, and then all of 2020. Apple just feels like they're falling behind the curve if that's how long we're waiting.
Just another comparison note, Android is going to support 5G natively in the next Android Q update that releases in August. So yeah, it would be good for iOS to do the same. A couple other quick updates that I wanted to mention for iOS 13 specifically is that the screen time is going to get a quality of life update. There are going to be some UI changes. The volume HUD is no longer potentially going to take up the whole screen when you just change the volume. You're going to get a cleaner today view look, a more gestures. The Reminders app is going to get a big overhaul as well, and the Health app is just going to give you better daily view of your health. But the one thing that I did want to sort of touch point on is iOS 13 on iPads. So a couple of this is probably my most exciting update area, because iPads are potentially going to get mouse support. That's something that I've been complaining about that just makes this device, something that's impossible to say it's a laptop replacement, because having a mouse just gives you such more precision when you're, moving files around and things like that. Linking in articles, which is something I was doing yesterday, it just was such a pain to do it with the touchscreen. So having mouse support is just going to make an iPad just much more, a much better experience when you're using it. And the other thing is you're potentially going to have a support for an iPad as a secondary screen to a Mac. So that means if you're an artist and you have an Apple Pencil, you'll be able to connect your iPad to a Mac, and you'll be able to draw on it. So that's kind of a nice feature to have it as an external display. And the whole Project Marzipan, which is something that Apple has been working on with macOS and iOS, building apps interfaces that work together through both platforms, that's going to have an update as well. So with things like using your iPad and your Mac, you'll have developers won't need to create two separate apps anymore, that they need to have one for touch and one for mouse and keyboard. Now you can sort of create one app and just have that interface work across all their systems. So hopefully that'll have some updates as well, and it just gives the iPad a much more productivity workflow improvements.
Which is nice, because we've thought for a long time that the iPad was sort of going to exist and maybe fall apart. It seemed like the tablet market was shrinking, and where's this thing fitting in? And yet people love them. People use them all over the place. You see, we've got one right here. My mom loves her iPad. Your mom loves her iPad. Everyone loves their iPads. So it's nice, and people use them like this as laptops. So it's nice to see improvements that continue to reflect what consumers are actually doing.
Definitely. And speaking of Mac OS, that's going to be Mac OS 10.15 is going to be the next update. And as we mentioned, Project Marzipan, as well as that iPad as a secondary screen, those are going to be some of the other updates. But the other biggest update is going to be the potential for iTunes to disappear. It's been 18 years since iTunes was first launched, and the rumor that just came out recently is going to say that iTunes is just going to go away. Instead, Apple is going to have separate music, TV, and podcasts app on Mac OS that basically allow you to interact with those old files and content as well. So that's a pretty big change. A lot of people.
So is Winamp going to outlast iTunes?
Potentially, basically. But it's nice because iTunes has looked and been like this thing that's just existed for so long, and it just feels so old.
Say it like it is. Yeah. It's clunky. It's a mess. We don't want it anymore. So I'm all for this. The other big buzzword, which is 4K. Apple has been so far behind the ball when it comes to 4K. And it's funny because the screens themselves on a lot of the products are super high resolution, but just not 4K. You need to support the right formats. You need to support all of the HDR that works behind the scenes to make sure that the quality's up there. And when you go to the iTunes market, you can't get 4K. There's some stuff, maybe look for help docs, and Apple will say, yeah, you can get 4K. You can't get 4K. It's just not there. And the problem is, of course, your MacBook Pro doesn't support it. Your Apple tablet doesn't support it. They don't have baked-in support for 4K anywhere. So is that something we're going to, as iTunes falls apart, and thank God for that, are we going to see a 4K world that steps in behind the scenes to replace it?
I mean, I'd surely appreciate it. Maybe not on an iPhone just yet, but down the road.
On everything else.
Yeah, exactly. So that's about it for macOS. There's of course going to be other minor updates. For example, several of those updates I said that are coming to iOS 13 will probably make their way, like that revamped Find My iPhone app, for example. Next quick update is going to be on the HomePod, which let's just say it's been a bit of a disappointment in terms of.
Still is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's something that you could buy. I just don't really know anyone that has one. I have never seen anyone really harping on it or really talking much about it. Either way, a potential update that we might see at WWDC is going to be multi-user support, something that Amazon Alexa devices and Google Home devices can already do. You're finally going to be able to have multiple accounts set up, and Siri being able to understand who's talking to it, whether it's your wife or someone else. So that's kind of a nice update, but I really hope we get a little more than that. It just seems like that platform isn't going anywhere, even though there's so much potential.
And it's unfortunate. I've always thought this was a great market for Apple because speaker quality is the key thing here, right? You've got some sort of a voice assistant device at home, and the odds are good you're actually listening to it a fair bit, not just speaking to it, but it's playing music, it's playing the radio. whatever it is. So the idea that they had behind this product, make a really high quality speaker, that's a great one.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, the product itself is very well made. It's one of the best sounding speakers as well. It's just, yeah, a lot of people also have just negative connotations with Siri. So, and I think Google and Google and Alexa, Amazon's Alexa sort of stormed into that market way before Apple did, which is making it harder for anyone else to really.
And their voice assistants keep pushing the edge.
Exactly. So Apple is very far behind, a lot to catch up on, and hopefully we can get some updates on the HomePod as well, which again is also an expensive device. And there have been rumors that Apple's going to make a cheaper device, a cheaper HomePod, but again, that has seriously died down, and we haven't seen really a lot of leaks about that recently. So who knows if we'll see anything like that at WWDC. And off to the last few updates is going to be for WatchOS 6. This one's going to have a bit of quality of life improvements. For example, you might finally get an app store dedicated to WatchOS. So that means you'll be able to download your app straight from your watch without having to use your phone. That's kind of nice, yeah. And that means more apps, more watch faces, as well as just in general, probably more health-related features. We don't really know exactly what might come. And TVOS 13 is going to be on the books as well. I don't really know what there is in terms of what features we can expect, but I assume they might talk more about Apple TV Plus that they announced a couple months ago, and maybe 4K, as you've been harping about.
If there isn't 4K, if they don't make big announcements around 4K, I will eat my 4K. It just seems like a thing that Apple really needs to get behind. It's a huge market, and especially when it comes to the content itself. How does Apple become the content supplier? Because a lot of what they've been talking about over the last few years is services, right? What services can Apple do? How can that bolster their bottom line? And how can they make it easier for you to get to stuff you want to see? Apple has a great opportunity here to become the 4K distribution mechanism. Here it is. It's the Apple TV. They have an Apple TV 4K product. Is it doing enough for you? I'm waiting to see what they say. And finally, maybe, possibly, hopefully, who knows, there might be an update to the MacBook Pro. It's been 5 years since Apple updated their hardware line here, and they've been updating everything else in the meantime, right? There's a new iPod Touch, there's been the iPad Mini, a variety of updates to some of the neglected parts of the lineup. So it'll be great to see if there is a MacBook Pro. So we've been hearing updates to the internal guts, right? There's a new Intel 9th Gen Xeon processor, possibly, potentially a new design for the MacBook Pro, which would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, and one of the other updates that might happen again is a modular design, so you'll be able to upgrade certain parts just by, taking it out without having to just buy a new device completely.
Which you've never been able to do without the product.
I don't think so, yeah. So that, again, might be the only hardware announcement, but we also don't know. That could be the one more thing. Potentially that might be something else. So
if that's the only hardware announcement, it's a huge one, and I'm looking forward to it.
For sure. But that's about it for WWDC and what to expect from the show. Again, it starts on June 3rd. The keynote is at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and I'll be on the ground. So check out my Twitter for more content, and also go to digitaltrends.com to get the latest.